we also update our budget spreadsheets like twice a week. So
Oh my
yeah.
God. Holly, adopt me. That's gorgeous.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to The Budget Fix. This is our new series where we are diving into real people's budgets. Holly Trantham, TFD's creative director. You might know me by now. And I am joined here today with my wonderful co-host, Berna. Hi, Berna.
Hello, Holly. Thank you for having me. Very psyched to be here. And like the first episode, get real nosy in people's budgets. My favorite.
Absolutely. For those who didn't catch the first episode of this, can you just give us a really quick hit idea of who you are?
Of course. So I am Berna Anat. I'm Hey Berna on the internet. I'm a financial educator. I call myself a financial hype woman. And I make content for folks who are like, what the heck, in terms of the money world where things are like too much finance-ese and very complicated. I break it down for like my inner 17-year-old. And that's what I'm hoping to bring to the Budget Fix today, is to break down concepts real simple and bring some fun perspective to a thing that's otherwise kind of feels like a burp. The word budget feels very blah. So we're gonna make it fun.
As a reminder, everything we say here is just for educational and entertainment purposes, and you should always seek the help of a licensed financial professional for your individual situation. So today we're diving into our second budgeter's budget. We're calling this one Dawn. So Dawn sent us her numbers in these screenshots from her budgeting app, so we can take a look at these here. Dawn has a salary in the ballpark of $85K with plenty of opportunities for overtime. Her take-home pay is about $4,200 a month from her full-time job. She currently contributes about 5% of her income to her retirement fund, and this is taken out of her paycheck before it hits her checking account. She does have a lot of opportunities for overtime. So last year, she actually took home $106,000 thanks to that overtime pay, but she definitely is looking to do less overtime this year in order to protect her peace and her mental health, which I totally am on board with. And Dawn lives in a small West Coast city with her partner, who she splits the mortgage with. Dawn says her biggest budget issue is going over budget with the mindset of, it's okay, just this month, I'll fix it next month, or not planning accordingly with Christmas or friends visiting or special outings for the next month. All right, Berna. So what are your initial thoughts on Dawn's situation?
I am like, yes, Dawn, I understand it very much. I love the fact that Dawn is like, I am trying to get a hold of my financial situation, but also get a hold of kind of that overtime like lever pull for mental health protection. That is fantastic. If we're thinking in that direction, then it's telling me that there is some wiggle room in terms of her budget, because they're feeling like I need to adjust my money life to fit my personal mental health life, which not a lot of us think about. I think a lot of us kind of gun towards our financial goals and we're like, and whatever it does to our mental health, it is what it is. So I love that Dawn is like, hold up, let's flip it and reverse it. Very, very healthy. I also really relate to that whole like when things calm down effect, the idea that there's some magical point in the future where things are going to be quote unquote normal. And this is me speaking to me in a mirror. This is normal, right? These bumps that we feel that, oh my gosh, suddenly there's a special occasion. Oh my gosh, that is the new normal. And we do run into a lot of budget situations when we think that there's some imaginary world where this is abnormal. So I'm thinking already, how can we budget for Dawn's actual real normal so this doesn't shock her in the future?
Yeah, I totally agree with you with the budgeting for different circumstances. I think we get in this like headspace sometimes of thinking things are always going to be consistent and perfect. And I mean, look at the news right now, like nothing is. We can't even predict the price of eggs anymore. So, I think that you have to set up some fail safes in order to make sure you're prepared for months being different. So Dawn says her biggest current financial struggle is overspending. This is because she gets in the I deserve it or worked for it mindset, or thinks it's not a big deal, I'll work overtime next month to make up for it. I'm currently putting everything on a credit card and paying it off each month. But then there's one month I'll go overboard with shopping, Christmas and my partner's birthday in January for this case. And now I'm stuck paying way too much on my credit card. I think that's really universal.
Yes, incredibly. And it's something that's sort of like, in my mind, I'm calling it the overtime cycle, especially because Dawn has access to oh, I could always work overtime and make up for whatever I did. So there's a moment of overspend, right? And then she thinks, I can just work overtime to pay it off next month. And then because she's working overtime to pay it off, she's exhausted. When we're tired, there's nothing left in our battery for discipline and will and budgets and like holding ourselves back. When we're tired, we're a little more like, I'm just feeling in need of comfort or ease. I just want to get my little sweet treat. And so we overspend again. And then we're like, well, dang it, I gotta work overtime. And so it just becomes this cyclical thing. And it sounds like we're working to break that by working less overtime, though we definitely need to solve the core problem, which is the overspending. And I'm sure we'll talk about this more, but again, special occasions happen at least once a month. In my mind, I'm like, it's a special occasion fund, it's a special occasion something, so that we break the cycle of surprise and kind of emotional like overturn when she is tired, and at the same time there's some sort of like financial mini bomb that goes off. These are things we can plan for.
Absolutely, especially when like every other month there's a new concert ticket surprise drop. And listen, that's not my journey. I'm not out here about to spend $500 seeing anybody. I don't think the experience is worth it for me at all. But I know for many of my friends, it is. If they don't budget for it, they should, because it's like they can't miss out on those things. So I think what you said about every month there's a special occasion is dead on. There's way too much pulling our attention, and a lot of those things are worth it, but you have to plan for it. Okay, lastly for Dawn, let's talk about her family background and relationship status. As I said earlier, she is in a long-term relationship with her partner of 5 years, and they live together. He's in law school, so she's covering more bills for the time he's in school, but he's still able to cover half the mortgage and the full internet bill and some random expenses. They're currently child-free, but they do parent 3 dogs.
Love that.
Dawn's family background is another immigrant parent family. She says, I grew up more low income, but my parents have been able to become more middle class as I grew up. My dad didn't believe in credit cards, so I didn't have my first until grad school. I've been mostly responsible with money until I got excited about moving out and living in my own place, furnishing it a couple times now. I recently bought a car from a dealership, which was super difficult for me because I was raised on it. If you don't have enough for the car in cash, then you can't afford the car mentality. And she says her parents sacrificed a lot. And some of their views can be a little bit outdated, like only buying salvage title cars or never having a credit card. But she does still want to be able to prove to them she's been able to take their lessons and create a good life. She says her dad thinks she has like $30K in savings, but after buying her house, she only has about $3K left in emergency savings. So she's not sure how he got into that mindset. And she did clarify to me that her parents also are government workers like she is and have their retirement taken care of, so she is not worried about taking care of them in retirement. Last note on her financial situation is that Dawn does have over $100,000 in student loan debt, but she is in the public service loan forgiveness program, and she has paid 50 of her 120 payments. So that means she has 70 payments left divided by 12. That's a little bit less than 6 years left of paying a minimum of $245 a month. And then, how the PSLF loan program works is then she's done paying it off. She just has to continue being in a job that's eligible for that program during that whole time. She does have some credit card debt from the aforementioned overspending cycle we talked about, and that is looking like around $7,000 currently. Okay, Berna, we have more information on Dawn. What are your thoughts on her situation?
For sure. Okay. So I think, of course, me being, I'm sorry, I keep getting astrological with it, water sign, I'm always going to go to the emotional and like mindset points first, especially if it's one of my first gen child of immigrant girlies. I see it so clearly. It's so funny how you can like see things very clearly when someone else tells a story. And then for you, you're like, what is inside me? How mysterious. I am very much seeing an inherited scarcity mentality situation going on. Very, very common for immigrant families and folks of immigrants. I'm imagining that Dawn's immigrant parents came here with potentially limited resources and got used to needing to really be strapped, just spend on survival. It sounds like they are used to buying cars with salvage titles, with cash. I'm hearing that sort of real classic first gen financial distrust of institutions. So like, no, don't take out credit cards, but also no, don't, those things are a trap or they're predatory. And there's some truth to that. But the way that like inherited scarcity mentality shows up, it shows up as guilt in spending money that we might actually have, which I feel like Dawn is in a little bit. It shows up in like default picking the lowest of all expenses and having those kinds of habits. It shows up as being afraid of debt, being taught to be afraid of debt, maybe even being taught to be ashamed of debt, even though it can be, and clearly even for Dawn has been a necessary tool in her life. I think it's really interesting that also in her application, in her story, she sort of says, I want to prove to them that I can still have a good life. I want to prove to my parents that I'm doing well. And I want to push on that. I'm like, what does it mean to prove things? What does it mean to do well? So there's a little bit of mental stuff that I definitely want to help Dawn unpack here.
Absolutely. And for those wondering, Dawn's overarching why her big money goal is specifically revolving around just being smarter with money in general. She says, I've been able to pay off all my credit card debt before, but easily get looped back into spending, so clearly something is wrong. Additionally, I did recently pull out a car loan, and one of my goals is to pay it off as quickly as possible. It's a 5-year loan. Okay, so getting into more of the, practical sides of Dawn's budgeting. Let's talk about that credit card debt and the tendency, or I guess the choice to put all of her spending on credit cards. I would love to hear your thoughts here before I share mine.
Oh my gosh, of course. You find me in a point of my life of transition where I was very much a put it all on the credit card girly, pay it off with cash because we want credit card points. That was always my driver. I'm just like, it's the great hack. It's how, I'm freaking child free by choice auntie. All I want to do is travel. I'm going to get points. The issue is even the most educational financial educatorists amongst us, me talking about me, gets caught up in the same, oh, it's fine, put it on the card, put it on the card. Mentally, there's a much higher kind of limit, / in my brain, almost no limit to my spending. It's so much harder to get disciplined when I'm seeing a number go up as opposed to seeing a budget go down. And so I've gotten caught in the same kind of, oh, I've overspent, I got to make it up. I've overspent, I got to make it up. I lose track of my budget entirely. And so I'm currently in a place where I'm transitioning everything over from taking things off of my credit card and spending on debit cards specifically, just so I can like remember what it is to have a budget, like in like a real technical way, not in an imaginary credit card way, in a I'm seeing the debit card go down kind of way. So it's a smart game. It could be a very smart game if you have a lot of discipline and system to really pay down what you just spent. Because if you don't, me talking to me, things can get sticky. It could be, what do you think?
I totally agree with you. My husband and I, so I'm very much the financial manager of my household.
Nice.
And we do put everything on our credit cards because we do play the points game, and we've gotten it to a system where like I just booked 3 different trips for us this year on for visiting family. So that's like a little one, but also like one to the West Coast and one to, I guess, also the West Coast. But a couple different trips that were entirely on points. And that was after last year when I also had. So we figured out a system, but we are extremely diligent about it. I think I'm a Capricorn. My husband's a Virgo. It just works for us. Like
Oh, astrologically, adopt me. Oh,
I want everyone to know I don't think you should necessarily take your sign into consideration for your budgeting, but I do think like it does speak to me, and I don't think it's like you should never download an investing app that's going to be based on your sign or anything. But like we are very much embodiment of that, the earth sign, very pragmatic household.
beautiful.
But like thank you, but we pay it off like almost immediately, if that makes sense. So we don't really wait until the credit card bill is due. We like pay it off like weekly or every other week when we get our paychecks, because that's just like that makes it feel more tangible, like a debit card. Like it makes it feel more like you're spending and you're not spending like fake money, if that makes sense. So I think it definitely can work. I totally agree with you if you have the discipline. It took me a while to get there. I definitely couldn't have done the same thing in my early 20s or anything by any means, but we also update our budget spreadsheets like twice a week. So,
Oh my God. Holly, adopt me. That's gorgeous.
Okay, and then also like looking at my notes here, Berna, you talked about the need for a bigger emergency fund. Why is that really important when you're using a credit card a lot?
So, an emergency fund for me is like, it's not just cash that you can use in an emergency, it's also like emotional kind of fail safe. It's that like feeling of security. If you have credit card debt, that is something that obviously we consider it the most expensive type of credit card debt. In an ideal world, you're paying it down as aggressively as you can, so you're not getting hit with those interest rates. If there's a situation in which you lose your job or your partner loses your job, having to depend on those credit cards to manage that emergency is only going to make your debt payoff situation way worse. You want to have emergency cash, not just in the event that you lose your job and you have to like keep up your life for a certain amount, but it could be, I mean, anything could happen in terms of like, even like catastrophic medical situations, or even not even catastrophic, a normal medical situation in our shitty insurance system that's going to need you to like pull out a bunch of cash at once. Cash allows you to react to emergencies quickly without having to think of the burden you're putting on yourself in terms of interest in the future. So it's really important to have an emergency savings and to prioritize that. That said, credit card debt, as we said, is the most expensive type of debt. And so what I'd like Dawn to do to some degree, and we'll talk about this, is sort of stack ranking her goals. It could be any mix of prioritizing paying off credit card debt and then building a bigger emergency fund, maybe putting in those car loans, student loans, and things like that. But there has to be some level of prioritization.
Absolutely. And we will dive much deeper into that in just a minute. But last thing on our list here before we move on to our mild, medium, and spicy recommendations, you mentioned, and this is totally such a good point, things like the PSLF program are maybe in jeopardy, maybe not going to be around forever. We just don't know. How does someone like Dawn prepare for this thing that they've been depending on potentially not existing anymore?
Totally. So, like you said, in doing the very Capricorn math, love it, that Dawn has maybe 6 years left. In a perfect world where PSLF, public service loan forgiveness, stays intact. Now, it is literally day by day in this administration that these things are under attack. And we just saw recently that there was an injunction that I believe put a pause and a forbearance on certain income driven repayment plans. I believe it was specifically the SAVE Act. So the injunction right now essentially pauses the SAVE Act, the Saving on a Valuable Education Income Driven Repayment Plan. And it also stops the clock on things like PSLF if you were using that SAVE plan. And so PSLF, it depends on, making consistent payments for those 120 payments. This stops that clock. So what I'm understanding is even if Dawn is making those payments, it's not going to count towards what would eventually give her loan forgiveness. I don't know if Dawn is enrolled in SAVE, but we do have to talk about some things that Dawn can do to protect herself and to kind of stay on top of what's happening with PSLF. Right now, as far as we know, and as far as my research showed, PSLF is not specifically being affected by the injunction itself. Like the PSLF plan, it's still around. It's just these pausing and these forbearances may make things a little complicated for Dawn.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the best thing you can do is stay informed about what's going on. I also don't necessarily think, though, that means Dawn should change her repayment plan. What do you think about that? Do you think she should change her plan to just pay the minimum payments?
Now, that's where it gets a little tricky because it may be that Dawn is enrolled in SAVE. And right now, they've paused payments and they've paused interest, which is good. But that means it pauses the clock as well for this 10-year repayment. And I'm imagining that Dawn wants to pay this stuff off as soon as possible. Dawn might consider, if her interest and her payments are already being paused, to ride with that pause and maybe lean into her credit card debt. Dawn could also consider, F it, I'm going to keep paying it anyway. It's just those payments may not be counting towards what it is she even wants, which is eventual student loan forgiveness. So she'd have to take a look at whether her payments are being paused or interest is being paused according to that, and then kind of make moves from there. And I have some suggestions in our mild, medium, spicy of how she could take a look at that. But it's something that she actually, if things are being paused, it's a little scary, but she might be able to leverage that because she has other kinds of debt that we can focus on.
Absolutely. And great moment to segue into our tiered recommendations. So this is what Berna and myself would do in Dawn's situation. Mild for me, the biggest, lowest hanging fruit, but also kind of most urgent priority is paying off that credit card debt.
Yes, totally agreed. So credit card debt is, I always see it as, because I am a child on the inside and I have to explain it to myself like I'm a child. Debt comes in different kinds of creatures, and credit card debt is the hungriest. And so it's going to eat at your cash the most. It's going to eat at your financial life the most. So totally agree with prioritizing credit card debt. And we can talk a little bit about, if I were to sit down with Don, we talk a little bit about what would that look like. To prioritize your credit card debt would mean then to, of course, make the minimum payments, but let's figure out if there's several kinds of credit cards that she's holding, which are the ones with the highest interest rates, which are the ones with the highest minimum payments, which are the ones with the highest balances. And we can figure out if she wants to do avalanche method. Dawn can choose to pay off the credit cards with the highest percentage of interest first. So the hungriest monster of them all, and then go from there. She could also choose the snowball method, which is going for the smallest debt and then building up from there, kind of get that like emotional win. But there are a lot of options we can look at to prioritize credit card debt.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that I've actually done in my personal life before and recommend to people who can figure it out mentally is a balance transfer card. You also have to make sure you're in a pretty good credit place for this to make sense for you, because a lot of times credit cards with a balance transfer offer, which is when you can transfer a balance onto this new card for a one-time fee, and then you have a specific amount of time to pay that off without any interest. So I've been able to get a card for 12-month period and a 15-month period at different times in my 20s to be able to take advantage of that 0% interest. I think this can be a really good solution if you are disciplined and committed to making the payments you need to make each month to pay it all off on time. Because if you don't pay it all off in the 0% APR period, you could be hit with a really big interest rate at the end that you will just put you back in the same cycle. So she has $7,000 in credit card debt now. If she were to take out a balance transfer card with a 12-month term and had a 3% transfer fee, she would have to pay about $600 a month to pay it all off over 12 months. Yeah, so I dropped her numbers into a budget spreadsheet just to be able to more easily do the math. I really love a spreadsheet, and this is a very simple template that we've used a lot at TFD. So as you can see here, the highlighted $600 a month credit card debt would put her, if you look at the bottom, about $58 over budget now. So she would have to find that elsewhere in her budget. But again, this kind of credit card debt is something that I think is pretty urgent because it is high interest, and that could end up being the most costly debt in the long run.
Yes, 100%. I fully agree with the balance transfer move, and also with the caveat that like you've got to commit to the discipline of paying it off monthly. I had a balance transfer experience in the past as well. And I was like, I got it. I got 0% interest for 18 months. It's going to be so lit. We're going to do it. And then because it was a totally new system in a different bank, I didn't get the notifications of when my credit card was due, and I wasn't diligent about looking at that date. I was one day off from paying the first minimum payment, and they were like, and we're taking away that 0% APR. Sorry. Did they tell me about it? No. I found out about it the next month when my payment was huge. I had an interest rate, like I had an interest charge. And I was like, what's this? And they were like, Miss Ma'am, you didn't follow the rules. I'm so sorry. That 18-month 0% APR is bye-bye. And I had to beg Holly for them to give me another chance. So Holly means it when she says you have to be diligent about this kind of thing. But it could be a massive help for someone like Dawn.
Yeah, it can definitely really help lower the total you pay over time because you're not accruing the big interest during that time period. But let's talk about Dawn's other debts. She needs to prioritize her credit card debt, her high interest consumer debt. What are our thoughts on her car loan, which she wants to pay off as quickly as possible, as well as her student loans?
Whenever I'm looking at sort of prioritizing your debt and stack ranking your debt, I'm always looking to compare interest rates, right? And of course, credit card debt is going to be the highest. And then I would want to also compare that, like, what is the interest rate then for her car loan? I'm imagining that for her car loan, she has a kind of shorter payment like horizon than student loans. Student loans were making continuous payments basically until she hits the 120. And so I'm wondering if she wanted to have a lower car loan payment month to month. Let's say if 500 is the minimum payment, Could it be refinanced, right? That's something we were talking about a little bit. I would say if she really wanted a lower payment, she could refinance her car loan to get a longer term so that the monthly payment is lower. That really depends on whether her credit score would allow her and whether she wants to maybe pay more interest in the long term. So it's kind of a trade off. You could refinance to get a lower monthly payment, but you might eventually be paying more in interest. And the nice thing is things like, and we can drop this resource in the episode as well, but things like LendingTree have an auto loan calculator. So you can see if I were to refinance my loan, here's what things are looking like now. Will I actually save money on interest? Is that going to be worth it to drop down that monthly payment? That's something she could use to make that decision.
Absolutely. Okay. And Berna, I see you also have a suggestion here for each tier in terms of what Dawn should do for her student loans. So what do you think the mild tier option for student loan action should be for Dawn?
For sure. I think the mild tier option is something that you can do today and should do as soon as possible. Lots of folks are doing this while the current administration is rattling the cage every single day. Print out all copies of your payment history on every single one of your student loans. We're seeing a lot of kind of website effery happening. People are like, I can't access my files. The login's getting weird. So while it's less weird, print out anything you can access in terms of payment history and any of your loan details right now. Just keep that somewhere safe. Save PDF files, but also save actual paper copies so that in the future, if anything wild happens, if a database gets corrupted, if things get erased, you can show, and this is especially important for someone in PSLF, you can show that history of the 50 payments that have been made so far so that that continues to count towards forgiveness. Crossing our fingers that forgiveness will still be a thing moving forward.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that is a pretty unpopular position to get rid of something like that. Same with, getting rid of Medicare and Social Security. Those are deeply unpopular. It's just that we don't really know with the current administration's, bent towards populism, what they're actually going to do. And because they're not really reacting to what is popular. One thing that Berna did for this episode, which I really love, is in every one of our tiered recommendations, she has a scarcity healing option. So talk to me about where that's coming from for Dawn and what you see being her mild scarcity healing tier.
Of course. So all of the things in my sort of plan for Operation Dawn Scarcity Healing has to do with questions that she might ask herself. I do want to say that when we're talking about things like scarcity mentality or anything that has to do with financial trauma, financial therapists are very much a thing. And that's someone who is licensed in talking through things and helping you really walk through things like scarcity mentality. Really helpful for first gen folks who are inheriting financial traumas or experience financial traumas. And as an adult, you're like, what the heck do I do with this? Absolutely seek the wonderful professional help of a financial therapist or someone certified in that way. And what I would ask in this mild situation is for Dawn to just think about stability. What would stability look like for her? What would it look like to be a person who is achieving what she wants? She was saying that she wants to be able to, feel on top of her finances, no longer in this cycle of like overtime and overpay. I just want her to sort of sketch out in this future version of Dawn, what does it feel like? What does it feel like to not be in that cycle? What does it feel like to know, oh yeah, I have enough for these surprises? What would fully prepared for these surprises look like for Dawn? In this way, whenever we journal things out like this, we can often come up with our own solutions of like, oh, that would look like, having money for surprises. That would look like being able to afford XYZ. The answers that come out of this sort of like future imagining can really help us feel grounded and committed to a future vision, as opposed to just being like, I should be better at this because I suck. If Dawn can think about what does like this future successful version of Dawn look like, it gives her something to walk towards. I would ask her to think and maybe journal on those questions.
I love that so much. Moving on to our medium tier. So my biggest suggestion is to set up different savings accounts and sinking funds for Dawn. I think that, she has some problem areas she's talked about, like holiday and birthday spending. We talked a lot about sinking funds in the last episode, so I don't want to get too in the weeds here, but what do you think could be a medium tier fix for Dawn when it comes to getting this overspending cycle under control?
For sure. I think this one here would be a matter of, again, normalizing the fact that there are always going to be special occasions. I was looking this past January, I was looking at all of my spending from 2024 in extreme sport. I did have a glass of wine while I did this. It wasn't easy. But I just assume that the end of the year, November to December, is the most expensive part of my life, right? There's the holidays. It's like my birthday, family birthday, and all that. I'm like, I definitely overspent the most then. But when I actually looked at my spending for all of 2024, I actually overspent in the spring because there were many trips, there were many birthdays, a lot of people in my life turning 40 and trying to go to Vegas. And I that just sort of like upturned it for me. And so for Don, in terms of creating these sinking funds, at this point, it's you could create sinking funds and you can create sort of just like what is the budget every quarter for these surprises. Let's pretend that there's a surprise every month. Great. Now let's create a surprise budget. Let's create a surprise budget for the month or for the quarter so that you just sort of treat it's essentially treating every month or every season like it's holiday season, because worst case scenario there, you have extra money and you're like, "Oh no, where can I put it? Sprinkle it more upon my loved ones or sprinkle it more like extra into my credit card debt or my car loans." I would really make that a healthy sinking fund. And if it's so consistent that it is more than a sinking fund and a line item, it becomes a line item in your budget, let that be. Just accept the normalization of life being a surprise all the time.
Absolutely. And when we look at Dawn's budget, she's got some very small numbers assigned to different categories, like entertainment is listed at $12. I don't know if that specifically includes just like a streaming service or something, but I definitely think when it comes to overspending, that is an area that probably could be budgeted more for. Same with restaurants and shopping. Those are both at just $100, which is, I mean, extremely frugal to me. So I definitely think that if you're in a cycle of overspending, you have to be a little bit more realistic with your numbers. Right now, Dawn just has about $500 unaccounted for in her budget before we did that extra math with the credit card repayments. That would be putting her a little bit over budget with her current budget. But one thing that Dawn, I don't think accounts for in her budget is that overtime pay that she gets. How would you suggest she lean into that fluctuating income from overtime in order to help her reach these goals without working as much as she did last year? Maybe, let's say, cut that in half from last year, get an extra $10,000 instead of an extra $20,000.
Yes, exactly that. I think when we're using the leverage of overtime to be like, I got to make up for this thing and I'm going to push as hard as I can, we might end up in a place where Don was at the end of last year, which is like, that was exhausting. Can we get to a place where we can define exactly how much overtime was just enough for her to feel like there is a little bit more income, create more like space in her budget, but without overwhelming herself? Like it sounds like her income without overtime was around 85K. And then she had opportunities for overtime, and that ended up netting out to 106K because of overtime pay. What if we split the difference with that? What if she planned on there being sort of like an overtime cap for herself every month to get to a certain number of hours that she knows is not going to burn her out, but can still be that like overtime pay equals more fun money, or overtime pay equals like padding my restaurant budget or going extra towards my credit card debt. I think if we could put numbers around the enough so there's never the chance of her going over, because now we know what going over looks like and feels like, and we don't need to do that.
Totally agree. I think, even with income that fluctuates, you still have to create a plan for it. That could even be just like planning for the minimum, like you said, planning for the minimum amount you're going to earn each month and making sure that that's accounted for in your budget. What would be your medium level suggestion for Dawn's student loans?
So in the mild level, we talked about printing out everything and keeping a record. In the medium level, I'm going to get a little Holly with it, get a little Capricorn with it. And one suggestion you can do, or one thing you can do as a suggestion, is to start keeping account of your own qualifying payments. Again, this is reacting from a place of, I don't know how these databases are going to look in the future. We don't know how the government and these entities are going to be keeping track of the history of things. These things might be wiped. We don't know. And so if you were to open up your own spreadsheet or even get a spreadsheet created where you are tracking all of those 120 payments and you're keeping screenshots in that spreadsheet, you're keeping proof. Basically, I want it to be so that nobody can fight you in terms of these 120 payments getting you to loan forgiveness, even if our government, our administration, and these injunctions and mandates do messy things with your data. I want you to have your own protected data and be able to prove all the work you've done so far.
100%. I think that, you know, that's definitely going to take a little bit more work than just printing things out, but I definitely think that'll be worth your time. And then lastly, what is your scarcity healing medium tier recommendation?
Ugh, heal that scarcity done. So I was hearing a lot of guilt in the overspending. I was hearing a lot of, oh no, and now I gotta work overtime. And it's not just your own guilt, obviously, of seeing your credit card debt, but it's sounding like this is stuff again inherited from your parents of just like, don't get into debt. That's a bad thing. One thing that I like to do, and this is a suggestion I got from my therapist, you can do this or not, is give the mic to the shamey, guilty feelings. What does it say when you overspend? If the guilt were a person, if the shame were a person, and you think about overspending or you think about, I went a little overboard, what are the words coming out of the guilt or the shame's mouth? It's important to, I think, write down or think it through. When you're like, oh, I should really do more overtime, even if I'm tired because I gotta, la, 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 what's that saying? The point of that is being able to identify the stories you're telling yourself in your head. When you write them down and you literally see the words of the stories and like the monologue happening in your head, you get to separate yourself from it and go like, wait, is that true? Is it true that maybe your guilt is like, you shouldn't be buying that because you don't deserve it? You get to separate it from your body and be like, is it true that I don't deserve it? Is it true that I don't have the money for that? Because actually the funds are right there. I also like to ask folks, like when you're giving then the mic and you're seeing those phrases come out, I don't deserve it, I feel guilty, I feel bad. Is that coming from you or is that something that somebody taught you? Are these phrases that you might have heard growing up that you're kind of parroting to yourself? And then you get to ask yourself, like, do I want to keep that in my financial brain? Is that true? Can I rewrite that somehow? Especially as if you're in the medium tier, really you're building out what is enough and what you do have. Those numbers might be in like direct opposition to the voices in your head that are like, you don't have enough and you don't deserve it. And so this is a really good way to sort of basically look at your brain and look at the numbers and be like, the math isn't mathing. The stories that I'm telling myself might not be true and it's unfair and I'm hurting myself with it. We can start to undo those monologues in our head.
Absolutely. And like Don, I would also encourage you to remind yourself how great you're doing. In many areas, you already own a home. That's an incredible accomplishment and something that you shouldn't take lightly. And moving on to our last tier, the spicy tier level recommendations for Dawn. Personally, this doesn't actually fall into her overspending. Why? But I did want to highlight something that stood out to me for Dawn, which is that she is putting 5% of her income into her retirement fund. She does have a government job, so perhaps she has maybe a retirement account like a 401k and a pension. But what do you think about this level of contribution to a retirement account?
I think that's decent. And I think it could be, I agree with you. I think it could be increased. The increasing of the 401k contributions can feel, as we said in the last episode, a little scary because then it's even more money that you're technically not seeing for yourself. It's more money being taken out of your paycheck. But especially in terms of Dawn wanting to feel like there's enough, that she's not overspending and the guilt, I think the more we can bulk up the 401k contributions and the more we can be like future Dawn is taken care of, the more that she can sort of unlock the permission to spend a little bit on herself and to move the money around to prioritize those goals. So I think it could be bumped up. I actually like to advise people to not go all the way and like bump it up to the max because it could be sort of like a shock to the financial system. Bump it up in increments if that makes you feel a little better to just to see it and kind of let your budget adjust from there. For me, I am a neurodivergent girly. I have ADHD and it's very out of sight, out of mind. And so when I've had jobs before and I've increased my 401k or retirement contributions, in my mind, I'm like, oh, it's gonna be hard to see less money and those numbers going to places that I want to. But then you adjust to the numbers that you see. But I would say adjust slowly for sure if you can.
Absolutely adjust slowly and definitely, look at a retirement calculator. Like I said, I actually don't know if Dawn has a pension or anything like that. So, you know, your mileage may vary with what you want to be doing, but you definitely want to use a retirement calculator to make sure you're setting yourself up well. And once you are feeling secure, knowing you're setting yourself up for the long term financial health that you would like, then that should hopefully help alleviate some of that overspending guilt and those overspending tendencies.
One other thing I would add to this that could be spicy is actually the thing that I'd mentioned before in my own, oh my gosh, cyclical credit card debt issues and why I'm transitioning over to a largely debit card system. And so we were talking about how Dawn has really, it seems like low spending in things like entertainment and fun and dining out. A big spicy challenge would be to preload debit cards for these places where she feels like she overspends and seeing exactly like can she actually stick to a cash budget as opposed to putting it on her credit cards. That's what I'm doing right now. I'm giving myself a specific ratchetry budget on a ratchetry card, a dining out budget on a dining card, all debit cards. And I'm able to then check it every time I spend to see the number go down as opposed to being like the credit card number's going up, I guess, but like whatever, I'm getting points. It's a hard transition for sure. And I, again, would recommend maybe working on one category at a time. But if Dawn really wanted to like hit super pause on the spending that she's doing on her credit card and switch over to a debit card system entirely, it's spicy, but it really does. Like, talk about boundaries. It gives you that structure. And then you could always, if you go over budget, then you could try to use the credit cards if you want or find the cash elsewhere. But having that mechanism of like, ooh, it says zero, I must stop, can really change your spending mentality.
Absolutely, especially while you're in the middle of paying off credit card debt. I think that can make it murkier when you're putting everything else on all of your regular spending on the credit card too. So, yeah, definitely some things to consider there. So Berna, what is your student loans spicy recommendation for Dawn?
Sure. So, Frick, I feel like a spicy level of all of this is like hold on and pray and survive while we figure out what is even going to happen with this. It sounds like she's doing all she can to be on the right repayment programs. I did see in a little bit of my research that there's something called the buyback opportunity, where it's essentially a program that lets people who have eventually finished those 10 years buy, like, technically they finished the 10 years in terms of like time count, but there might have been payments before they got into PSLF where the payments didn't count. They might need to sort of get a few more payments to get them across the finish line for forgiveness. It's something that you can apply to if you are using PSLF right now. I've seen also some financial experts be like, if you feel like this might be you and you might use this in the future, look into applying now because this program may not last forever because everything is being threatened. So, Dawn, if you feel like you're getting close to those 10 years or this is something applicable to you, just look into the buyback opportunity. In general, it's good to lean into the safeguards that we have now while the programs exist, because when they're gone, then they are gone. And we're not excited about that, but we do what we can do to protect ourselves now.
Absolutely. And I didn't even know about that program. So thank you, Berna, for bringing that to our attention. And then lastly, what would your scarcity healing recommendation on the spicy level be for Dawn?
This is spicy because now I'm talking about considering things with your parents. And I'm not saying go to your parents and be like, hey, you have scarcity mentality, fix it. I would get a slipper to the face if I ever said anything weird like that to my parents. But I would want her to think about this whole idea of proving to her parents that she's okay. I just wanted to think about like, what would it look like to prove to your parents that you're okay? What is it your parents see as stability and okayness? And is that something that you, Dawn, want to gear towards? Something to consider: your stability as the child of immigrants working in a very different system, and with like different income now, your stability can look really different from your parents. I'm not saying that you need to like fix your parents' like view on stability, but consider what it means to kind of gun towards a vision that might not be yours. Consider, and that's why in the mild situation, I wanted you to define what stability might look like. This part is like acknowledging that it might look different from your parents' level, and that's okay. Or it might look like something that actually is achievable, and it might mean something to you to be able to show your parents, hey, like, I don't know if you know this, but check out my mortgage. Like, I bought this house. We're good. Or like, let's have a conversation of what stability might look like if your parents want, some sort of support in the future. Get a little bit of a better idea of what stability looks like on either side and start to make some peace around the fact that it could be different, and like them's the breaks. That's just interesting generational effery for you. It's a very interesting thing, and I don't think actually is unique to first gen folks. Every generation has a different definition of stability, and I feel that we are all disappointing them in some way. And to try to fix that disappointment or heal it, it may be a little bit of a foregone conclusion for us. And so I want her to move a little bit towards like the piece of we might just be different, and that's fine.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I'm certainly not first gen. From my basic research into ancestry, every single one of my great, great, great grandparents moved to Missouri from Germany in the 1830s. So, and I have had to have very, not difficult, but like very candid conversations with my parents. Like, listen, I'm probably never going to own a home. Like, let's, I'm choosing to live in New York City. I have really good rent, like, situation. And this is not something that I'm prioritizing. And it's it's an adjustment for sure for everybody to rethink what stability looks like for their kids. But like, I'm doing great. Anyway, any final thoughts here, Berna?
I think Dawn is in an awesome position where it feels like the tweaks that we're making for their budget and the kind of prioritizing we have to do for their credit card debt is very within Dawn's grasp. I think it's a matter of setting up the right systems and kind of prioritizing things so that it feels doable. But I'm excited for Dawn because it feels like this is all like just very reachable. It's within her grasp. And so then there's a little bit of space then to start to gently unpack that scarcity situation, the guilt and the shame alongside the really tangible things that we suggested. So I'm psyched for her.
Well, thank you so much, Berna. This was so much fun. I totally agree with everything you just said. And where can folks go to find you to make sure they're following all the wonderful work you're putting out there?
Of course. I am loudest and most obnoxious on Instagram at Hey Berna. At Hey Berna on all the different channels. I'm also working real hard as a head of content community culture at New Dimes. So for anyone who's been like, man, she's on that first gen train and I'm trying to get on there too, first gen wealth building. We are building out a first gen wealth building network at New Dimes. You could follow us new_dimes or newdimes.co. Working on a lot of stuff.
Well, thank you so much. I agree. I'm totally psyched for Dawn. I think there's a lot of stuff that looks really good here already. So I think that this is a really doable plan and hopefully something that works out for her. Thank you all so much for joining us this week on The Budget Fix, and we will be back with one more episode next week. Bye.